My DIL laughed as my son said, "Go to your room at Xmas," but I had recorded everything. The first Christmas after my wife died, I set out her Wedgwood set, lit candles like I had for the past 40 years, thinking we would be together. As soon as we sat down, my son raised his glass. "To a new beginning, we're buying times this house from you, Dad. You don't know yet." The whole table laughed. Jessica curled her lips. "A nursing home would be more appropriate." I put down my glass, my voice calm. "That's interesting, because times my lawyer called this morning." Mark paused, and Jessica stopped laughing. "You're forgetting one thing. This house times is not for sale times and never was." I put out an envelope and pushed it across the table. "Here's the proof, along with the recording of the night you planned it." No one breathed. I looked straight at him. "Stop acting. Tonight, you'll learn a lesson. Betrayal is expensive. And I always keep times receipts asterisk. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening?" I used to think Christmas Eve drew a velvet curtain over all the small cruelties families commit during the year, softened them, muffled them, made them sound like generosity. Light enough candles, pour enough wine, and you can almost convince yourself that all the jagged edges of family life are only reflections from the chandelier. For years, I believed that. I believed it even when I knew better. I spread Eleanor's New Orleans tablecloth, festive but not gaudy, she said when she bought it, and smoothed each crease as though politeness were pressed into the fabric. Then the Wedgwood china, her grandmother's, white with a faint wreath of green laurel. The heavy glasses caught the lamplight and made the whole table shimmer. I aligned everything perfectly. Order comforts me. It's what I teach, after all. History is humans arranging chaos, and then pretending the pattern was deliberate. Before lighting the last candle, I followed another of Eleanor's rituals. She never took photographs at holidays. She recorded sound. "Photos are for strangers," she used to say. "Sound is for the people you love." She liked how laughter sounded real when you played it back. I placed a small digital recorder behind the nativity scene. I thought I was preserving memory. I didn't realize I was preserving evidence. By 5:30, the house smelled of butter and rosemary. The prime rib rested under foil. The tree winked in the corner, smug in its symmetry. I arranged Eleanor's keepsakes, her crystal angel on the mantel, the brass bell by the door, the embroidered runner her mother stitched when thread was cheaper than new dishes. It steadied me to place her things exactly where she would have. At 6, the doorbell rang. Mark and Jessica are punctual the way people are when the event serves their image. They arrived in a sweep of perfume and cold air. Jessica, in a champagne-colored sweater, smiled like someone posing for a lifestyle ad. Mark kissed my cheek, already glancing around, assessing the room like a real estate agent. "Dad," he said brightly, "everything looks amazing." He said it the way a project manager says, "Good enough, let's move on." Behind them came two couples. I barely knew Jessica's friends. Their laughter just a little too polished. The women drifted to the tree, murmuring appreciation. The men went straight to the bar cart. "Oh my gosh, Jess," one of the women exclaimed, holding up a dinner plate. "This Wedgwood is gorgeous. Is it yours?" Jessica ran a manicured finger along the rim. "Oh, it's family," she said confidentially. I had to rummage through the dusty attic to find it. David's dad had almost forgotten they existed. The attic, of course, is labeled and cataloged to within an inch of its life. I could have found that sat blindfolded, but I smiled. This was a play, and I knew my role. The quiet father, the useful prop. "Good eye," I said, swallowing the truth with a whine. Dinner began with cheerful noise. Jessica introduced each dish like a caterer reading a menu. Arugula salad with shaved fennel because digestion matters, right? Laughter, perfectly rehearsed. She'd rearranged Eleanor's keepsakes to match her own aesthetic color-coded grief. I called it privately. When the talk turned to politics, bourbon warmed the table into boldness. I offered a small observation. If we consider the historical context from the Nixon era— "Come on, Dad," Mark interrupted too loudly. "We're in the 21st century. Leave those old theories in your office." The table laughed. obedient and relieved. The recorder behind the nativity sheep captured it perfectly. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and I heard the rhyme of disrespect in my son's voice. We passed the horseradish, the carrots, the illusion of harmony. I told a small story about Mark at 7, guarding Santa's cookies on the stairs, clutching his dinosaur. Jessica giggled, whispered something, and Mark smiled, not fondly, but conspiratorially. Whatever joke they shared, I was the punchline. Sweet, Jessica said. You were such a little planner. Even then. I still am, Mark replied, their glance sealing the private humor. Forced warmth has a half-life. It burns bright until it collapses. I excused myself to fetch another bottle of wine. In the kitchen, I breathed, the sound of the oven timer my only companion. When I returned, Jessica was describing her New Year's trip to Aspen. They have heated sidewalks, she said, as if that proved moral advancement. But it's fine, we budgeted. We're being so responsible. Responsible, Mark echoed, lifting his glass toward me. Go ahead, Dad. It's my money anyway. The words froze the room. He would later say he was joking, lightening the mood. That's how the new cruelty works. The insult is the joke, and the defense in the same breath. If you don't laugh, you're humorless. If you object, you miss the point. But I knew the truth. Upstairs on my desk was a folder full of receipts, every bottle, every dish, every flower ordered in Jessica's name and charged to me. The entire night, dressed as generosity. Financed by silence. I set down the bottle carefully. Restraint is not weakness, it's strategy. Mark grinned, mistaking my calm for concession. Well, we're family, he said. What's yours is ours, right? I looked at him, the confident smile, the performative ease, and something inside me shifted like a curtain falling. Family, I said softly, filling the glasses. Yes, that's one interpretation. The recorder kept running, quiet and impartial. Eleanor had wanted to capture laughter. That night, I captured the truth. The room had softened after the toast, as if the wine had finally begun its quiet work. Forks scraped plates. The jazz playlist that Jessica had chosen, Modern Christmas, but make it classy, play something smooth and self-assured. I could almost believe the night had survived its stumble. Almost. Then Jessica's father leaned forward, his cufflinks winking under the light. Mark, Mr. Harrison said, his voice the kind that belonged to men who'd made their first million before they turned 30. I must say, you've done very well for yourself. Buying a house in this neighborhood, driving a BMW, managing a team at your age is impressive. Mark's shoulders straightened. Compliments from his father-in-law were oxygen. Thank you, sir, he said. It's all self-funded. Never taken a penny from anyone. The words slid easily out of his mouth. Smooth as cream. A tiny, precise lie. I set my glass down before my hand betrayed the tremor in it. The cut crystal made a clean sound against the table, like punctuation. Really, Mark? I said, my voice calm enough to surprise even me. The down payment on this house and that car don't count as a penny? The words floated across the table like a slow-moving fuse. Jessica's friend coughed into her napkin. Mr. Harrison's wife stared at her plate, tracing the rim with a fork. Even the playlist seemed to hesitate. Mark laughed once sharp, too quick. Dad, he said, don't start. But I didn't. I simply looked at him the way I used to look at students who thought charm could replace footnotes. You said you never took a penny, I reminded him. That was inaccurate. The silence that followed had weight. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the click of the radiator warming the old house's bones. Mark's face flushed the color of the Cabernet in his glass. Enough, he snapped, slamming his palm on the table. The silverware jumped. You always do this. You can't stand when someone else is happy. You're jealous because I'm more successful than you. No one breathed. Jessica put her hand on his arm, but it wasn't to calm him. It was to steady the stage. Mark, you're right, she said brightly, smiling at a stunned guest. David's really children. She giggled, almost musically, like a child who isn't being noticed and starts acting up. The laughter that followed wasn't real laughter. It was self-defense, a reflexive chuckle to signal allegiance. The room tilted slightly and I could feel something inside me tilt with it. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, a sound too small to save anyone. Well now, Perhaps Mark cut him off, eyes blazing. Go to your room, old man. Don't ruin our party again. It landed like a slap, though he hadn't moved from his chair. The air turned dense. Even the Christmas lights seemed to flicker. I heard Eleanor's voice in my head, not as a ghost but as memory. Pick your moment, David. Then let them think they've won. For a second, I didn't move. I stared at my son, the boy who once called me dad in the middle of the night because he dreamed the monsters had no eyes. I wondered when he stopped believing I could see him. I heard my own breath, measured and steady. His shout still rang in my ears, but under it was something else. Clarity. Cold, clean clarity. No one dared to breathe. I will later remember. Mr. Harrison looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. His wife dabbed an invisible stain on the cloth, pretending to find it fascinating. Jessica's friends glanced between them, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, the way people watch a car crash, horrified, but unable to look away. I set my napkin down beside my plate, folded perfectly in half. If that's what you want, I said quietly, and then I nodded. A small, deliberate movement. A historian recording a date, marking a turning point. Mark blinked, thrown off balance. He had expected resistance, not compliance. Yeah, he muttered, trying to recover. Maybe that's best. I stood, straightened my chair, and looked at him one last time. You wanted a play, I said softly. I'll give you a finale. The guests didn't know whether to laugh. Jessica did a brittle, high-pitched sound that broke halfway through. Oh, David, she said, shaking her head. You're so dramatic. I smiled politely, the way you do when someone thanks you for something you never gave. Then I turned and walked toward the staircase. Each step felt deliberate, heavy but unburdened. I passed the framed photographs on the wall, Eleanor and me on the cape, Mark as a boy with chocolate on his chin, the three of us standing beside the old car I'd sold to pay for his first semester of college. The hallway smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Somewhere behind me, someone poured wine, trying to pretend the evening hadn't just fractured. When I reached the landing, I paused. The murmur below had resumed hushed voices, nervous laughter, chairs scraping. They were trying to repair the illusion. They kept quiet because they were allies, I thought. Or at least they didn't want to be enemies. In their world, money and image are kings. The truth is just an uninvited guest. In my room, I closed the door softly. The light from the hallway seeped under the frame like a fading spotlight. I stood there for a moment, listening. The sound of their laughter downstairs reached me, muffled and false. But it didn't sting anymore. I walked to my desk, the same oak desk where Eleanor used to write Christmas cards in her looping script, and turned on the lamp. The soft pool of light felt almost sacred. On the corner sat my laptop, the lid half open, waiting. I sat down, my reflection faint in the dark window beyond the desk. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the flakes drifting sideways like lazy ash. I could see the faint outlines of the guests through the glass downstairs, moving like actors on a stage they no longer controlled. When I walked up the stairs, I thought I didn't feel humiliated. I felt free. The burden of pretending, of maintaining the illusion of family harmony was gone. They had shattered it themselves. Now the cleanup was mine. I reached for the recorder in my pocket, the tiny black one from the nativity shelf, and placed it beside the laptop. A red light blinked, steady, patient. Downstairs, someone proposed a toast to fresh starts. Jessica laughed too loudly. Mark said something I couldn't hear. Fine, I whispered. Let's start fresh. I opened a new file on my computer. The title line blinked at me, waiting. I typed 3 words. Eleanor once said after our worst argument, words that seemed fitting now. Truth has receipts. Outside, the snow thickened. The world was turning white again. Clean, silent, ready for revision. Downstairs, they believed I'd gone to my room to sulk. In a way, I had. But sulking is what children do. Historians, on the other hand, prepare the record. And mine at last was about to be set straight. I didn't turn on the overhead light in my office. I preferred the desk lamp's small circle of purpose. The room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil, the way Eleanor kept it. Books rose in orderly ranks US. Political histories, labor movements, biographies with spines, softened by years of students and arguments. The order steadied me. People think revenge is hot. In my experience, truth is served at room temperature, labeled, and filed. I woke the laptop. The black screen gave me a brief reflection, an older man, still himself, and then the password prompt appeared. I typed it with a reflex of habit and watched the desktop bloom into neat folders, syllabi, taxes, Eleanor, memories. The last one was locked with a small gold padlock icon. Eleanor would have rolled her eyes at the dramatics and then approved of the redundancy. After she died, the house grew so quiet that the silence felt like an extra room. To fill it, I'd added a smart, voice-controlled audio system in a few rooms: the kitchen, the living room, the hall. I meant to ask it to play Coltrane when the afternoon sagged, or to record myself telling family stories for the grandchildren I assumed would eventually arrive. The system was obedient, sometimes too obedient. Record is just a cousin of remember, and the software didn't always distinguish between them. The result? An accidental archive. I opened memories, typed the second password, and watched rows of audio tiles appear dated, time-stamped, color-coded, dozens of them. I scrolled past 2023 -12 and -18 living room. Wave 2023-0802 kitchen MP3. 2024-0611 hallway. M4A. Each a wafer of sound thin as a page, dangerous as a blade. A historian should be wary of primary sources. They are intoxicating. They make you feel like the past is within reach when it's only ever on loan. Headphones on, volume low. I clicked one labeled 2023 -12 -20 12 1609 kitchen. The waveform unspooled. The soft clatter of a pan. A drawer. Jessica's quick, efficient footsteps. She walks as if the world's late for her. A phone rings, answered. Her voice was sugar-dusted over steel. It worked, he agreed. Mark's answer came with a grin you could hear. See? I told you. Just say exactly what he wants to hear. A little about mother's legacy. A little about making father proud. The old man is surprisingly easy to manipulate. 2 years ago, the week I wired the money that was supposed to seed a safe, sensible index fund, and instead went spelunking in crypto caves with names that sounded like energy drinks, I remember the way Jessica had clasped my hands, eyes glossy, saying, "We'll make you proud, David." Eleanor would be proud too. Grief is a door left ajar, common family included. Feel the draft. I scrubbed back. Listen again. This time as I would listen to a student reading a paper aloud, tone, cadence, motive revealed in the choice of a single verb, manipulate. They'd picked the right one. The word sat there, small and homely, like a nail that later punctures the tire. I paused the file, wrote on a yellow pad. Rec 1, it worked. Old man, manipulate. I breathed in, slow, bitter. Yes, because bitterness is just unspent love. But beneath it, iron. I've graded enough exams to know the only thing that moves you forward is the evidence. Next file, 2025-060-419-27 living room. 6 months this year. I remember the night. A barbecue on the patio. The neighbor's fireworks already practicing for the 4th. I had gone inside to get ice, stood just outside the living room doorway when the audio system, said to record my summer stories, caught something else. Mark's voice, pitched to casual bravado for a man I later learned was his business partner. No, don't worry about capital. I have an endless retirement fund. As long as he's still breathing, we have money. The laugh that followed theirs, together, was the laugh of men who talk about fire exits while locking the doors. I closed my eyes. There's a point in cruelty where language stops being sloppy and becomes accurate, endless. As long as he's still breathing. You can't misinterpret a clause like that. I rewound 15 seconds. Then again, letting each word etch where it needed to. I pictured my own father's hands at the end of his life, mottled and steady. I thought, parasites are part of the natural world. The host must learn its own defenses. I wrote, Rec 2, endless retirement fund, as long as he's breathing. The third file I didn't need label to remember. Last week, 2025 a negative, 12 a negative, 18 negative, 10 negative, 43 kitchen. Jessica's heels on tile. The bright ping of a message. Her phone call, her mother's voice, tinny with speakerphone distance. Of course, we're having Christmas at his house, Mom. It's free. The wine, the food, he'll pay for it all. All we have to do is show up and look our best. Her mother's was the sort of that means this is how you do it. Jessica continued. Don't wear red. It fights with a tree. And, like if you can, pretend you like the roast. He gets sensitive about recipes. One neighbor of the casual contempt in it had the hairline crack of something practiced into habit. You don't become fluent in that tone overnight. I let the file play until it caught the soft closing of the back door and the small sound I now recognize as my own breath when I decide not to say something I would later wish I'd said. Headphones off. The room was very still. The radiator huffed once and settled. I could hear distant laughter from downstairs, brittle, as if the house itself were tired of accommodating it. Calm and methodical. Bitter where it hurt, iron where it needed to be. I organized. I selected the 3 files and dragged them into a blank folder on the desktop. The cursor hovered over the name line while my fingers considered their options. Titles matter. Historians know this. It's how you teach meaning. The truth about Christmas. I typed it and pressed return. Inside the folder, I named each clip with the clarity I wished I'd had sooner. 1. Manipulate the old man. 2. Endless retirement fund. It's free. Just show up. I created a simple playlist file, checked its order, tested the volume so the words would ride above any nervous laughter in a larger room. Technology is only as good as you are intentional. I exported a second copy to a thumb drive and slid it into my pocket with a recorder. Redundancy is a friend of truth. Before closing the laptop, I wrote a single paragraph in a plain text document, a prologue that would appear on the TV screen like a title card. After Eleanor died, the house was too quiet. I installed a voice-controlled audio system to play music and record my own stories for my future grandchildren. Sometimes it recorded other stories too. The following are theirs. I read it twice, trimming a word, swapping another, until it was spare enough to be undeniable. This wasn't a trap. It was a transcript. That mattered to me. On the yellow pad, I added one last line beneath the recordings. Not a family in trouble, an infection. Treat accordingly. I slid the headphones off and listened to the house. The party's pulse had found a jittery rhythm again, plates, glasses, someone saying, top me off. The snow presses quiet against the window. I closed the laptop, felt the magnet catch. When I stood, the chair legs made a soft sound against the rug, dignified, like old wood acknowledges weight and lets it pass. I picked up the laptop by its edges, took the thumb drive and the recorder, and turned off the desk lamp. The office dimmed to a kind of thoughtful dusk. It suited the moment. On the landing, I paused and looked down the stairwell. The tree's lights blinked their patient pattern. From here, the dining room was a diorama hands gesturing, heads bent, silver flashing. They had their stage, I had the archive. Down the first step, then the second. My heart didn't race. It counted not fear, but beats before an overture. The finale would not be loud at first. It will be clear. And when clarity is public, humiliation is just the consequence of recorded choices. I went to rejoin my guests. The dining room was still glowing with its curated perfection when I came back down the stairs, gold candles, crystal glasses catching light, the hum of polite laughter trying too hard to sound normal. The air smelled of roasted rosemary and something faintly scorched underneath. Conversations faltered as I appeared, laptop in hand. Jessica's eyes darted up first. Dad, she said, her voice stretching itself into a smile. You're back. Everything okay? Mark half rose from his chair, the reflex of someone who senses an unpredictable variable. If you're here to apologize for before, I crossed the room without answering, the way a lecturer crosses to a podium he's used 100 times. No, I said. Actually, I'd like to share something with everyone. It won't take long. They exchange a look, the one that says, control the optics. Smile through it. The television mounted on the wall gleamed like a mirror. Mark had insisted I buy it last Black Friday. You need a proper 8 Kelvin screen, Dad. Elevate your family entertainment experience. I never thought that family entertainment would come to mean this. I set the laptop on the buffet table, took the HDMI cable from its coil, and plugged it into the port beneath the screen. The faint chime of connection sounded. The room quieted as though the technology itself had demanded attention. Is this another slideshow? Jessica tried. Oh no, are these baby photos? I didn't answer. The title appeared across the dark screen in white text, simple and clean. The truth about Christmas. The cursor hovered for one moment. Then I clicked play. A hiss of background noise. The unmistakable jingle of my kitchen clock. And then Jessica's voice, bright and familiar, carried into the room like perfume turning sour. It worked, he agreed. A beat, and then Mark's voice, unmistakably him, confident, casual. See? I told you. Just say exactly what he wants to hear. A little about mother's legacy, a little about making father proud. The old man is surprisingly easy to manipulate. The words hung in the air. Electric. For a moment, no one breathed. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses lowered in slow motion. Jessica blinked rapidly, her smile trembling at the corners. This is a joke, right? Dad, you're kidding, right? This is a sick Christmas joke. Her father turned toward her, disbelief hardening in his eyes. Jessica, what was that? Mark's chair scraped back. Turn it off, he said sharply. Turn the damn thing off. I tightened my grip on the laptop. My voice was even. Sit down, Mark. The show's just beginning. You wanted the party to remember, right? He froze. Everyone could hear the faint tremor beneath my calm. Then I clicked on the second file. The sound was different this time. Summer air. Muffled laughter. The echo of a backyard evening. Mark's voice again, speaking to someone unseen. No, don't worry about capital. I have an endless retirement fund. As long as he's still breathing, we have money. Mrs. Harrison gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Harrison's expression collapsed into the stony quiet of someone realizing what he's raised his glass to. Jessica's face drained of color. That's taken out of context, she said desperately. That's not out of context? I repeated softly. Try the next one. I clicked play once more. The recording from last week began with a bright chime of her phone. Jessica's tone was cheerful, unguarded her true voice. Of course we're having Christmas at his house, Mom. It's free. The wine, the food, he'll pay for it all. All we have to do is show up and look our best. The words seemed to echo off the chandelier. And there, sitting across from her, her own parents flinched, as if struck. Mr. Harrison stared at his daughter as though seeing her for the first time. Free? He said quietly. That's what you told your mother? Jessica's hand shook as she reached for her wine glass, missed it, and sent it toppling. The red spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. Mark lunged for the laptop again, his voice cracking. Enough, Dad. You've made your point. You think you're some kind of hero? I met his eyes. No, I said. Just a historian. And historians deal in primary sources. And Tadasung, laughter, nervous, disbelieving, flitted from one end of the table to the other, then died. The room had turned cold, even with the candles still burning. Jessica pressed her palms to her temples. You can't humiliate us like this. This isn't love. This is cruel. Love, I said. You both use that word often. I think you redefine it somewhere between loan agreements and inheritance forecasts. Her mother stood abruptly, muttering something about the ladies' room, but no one followed. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the crackle of the fireplace, pretending the room was still warm. Mark sank back into his chair, hands gripping the edge of the table. His voice had shrunk. You don't understand, he said. I was trying to help us all, to keep things going. By lying, I said. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. By surviving. That might have been the most honest thing he'd ever said. I unplugged the HDMI cable. The television went dark, its reflection throwing the room back at us, faces pale, eyes hollow, a family portrait in ruin. No one spoke. The silence felt solid enough to lean on. Jessica's lip trembled. Her mascara had smudged into 2 gray half-moons. You ruined everything, she whispered. No, I said quietly. You did. I just stopped pretending you hadn't. I looked around the table, Mr. Harrison's disbelief, Mrs. Harrison's disgust, the guests' awkward pity, and felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just a steady, clean emptiness. The kind that follows a storm when every branch that needed breaking is finally down. I looked at my son's face. I would later remember, contorted with horror, and I felt nothing. That man, that stranger, had nothing to do with me anymore. I closed the laptop gently and tucked it under my arm. The candles guttered in the draft, their flames bowing low. Thank you, I said, voice even, for attending tonight's performance. I hope it gave everyone a clear understanding of family values. Jessica sobbed once, sharp and dry. Mark's head dropped into his hands. I turned to leave. At the doorway, I paused. Oh, and for the record, the TV really did elevate our family entertainment experience. No one laughed. I stepped into the hallway. Behind me, the music playlist finally restarted itself, some smooth jazz piece about peace on earth. From the sound of it, the earth had never felt further away. And as I climbed the stairs once more, the house that had felt heavy for years suddenly seemed light. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the faint pop of the firewood and the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock. Above the mantel, each second an accusation, each tick a small, clean cut through the air. The party was over, though no one had announced it. The wine glasses stood half full, the roast sat cold, and the centerpiece candles had burned down to little puddles of wax. It looked less like a dinner table now, and more like the aftermath of a car crash, everything still. Everyone trying to understand what had just happened. Jessica's father was the first to stand. The chair scraped sharply against the floor, startling everyone. He didn't look at Mark or Jessica. He looked straight at me. David, he said, his voice low, measured, and trembling just slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't know I was marrying my daughter to this kind of man. He turned toward Jessica. The disappointment in his face was worse than anger. It was quiet, unarguable. Come home. We need to talk. Jessica's mouth opened and closed soundlessly before the tears began to spill. Mom, no, Her mother stood too, pushing Jessica's reaching hand away. Your father is right, she said, her voice clipped. Formal, the tone people use when they decide they will not be embarrassed any longer. It's a shame. The word shame hung in the air like smoke. Mister. Harrison buttoned his jacket, nodded once to me, respect, apology, maybe both, and started toward the door. The other guests followed, murmuring excuses that weren't excuses at all. Long drive, early morning, thank you, so sorry. None met Jessica's eyes. Shoes scuffed, coats were pulled from hooks, the front door opened, closed, opened again. And then, just like that, they were gone. The silence they left behind had a strange gravity. It pressed against the walls, against my ribs. The chandelier still glowed politely above the wreckage, lighting the broken spectacle for no audience. Jessica was the first to move. She sank back into her chair, trembling, mascara smudged into gray streaks. Mark sat across from her, staring at nothing, one hand still on the table as if anchoring himself. I looked at the two of them, my son and his wife, framed by all the things they'd wanted, the expensive dishes, the gleaming glassware, the illusion of class, their perfect tableau, now in ruins. You should eat something, Jessica whispered to Mark, her voice small, fragile. You look pale. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the wall, his jaw tight, his pulse visible in his neck. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one that had always been mine, and sat down. The wood creaked softly under my weight. For the first time in years, I felt it, the sense of ownership, of rightness. This was my house, my table, my rules. Listen carefully, I said. My tone was steady, but it cut through the silence like glass through silk. They both looked up. I'm giving you 1 week to move out of my house. Jessica blinked, confusion mingling with disbelief. Move out? You can't. I can, I interrupted, my voice calm, almost kind. Legally, you're just guests here. I'm under no obligation to give notice. A week is my last hurrah. Mark finally spoke, his voice hoarse. You're serious? Yes. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. All additional credit cards will be canceled tomorrow morning. Every account I've funded under your names will be frozen. Financial support ends now. Don't call. Don't text. 1 week. Then I'll change the locks. Jessica gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. David, please, this isn't fair. We made mistakes, yes, but you can't just throw us out like garbage. Garbage, I repeated softly. You're right, I can't. Garbage doesn't lie. Garbage doesn't smile to your face and drain you behind your back. Mark pushed his chair back violently, standing, his voice breaking. You think you're better than us? You think you won? I met his eyes. No, Mark. I think I stopped losing. That ended it. He sat back down, deflated. The house seemed to exhale a long, tired sigh. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, softening the world into white. When I said my last words, I thought I didn't feel gloating. I just felt tired, as if I'd finally ended a war I didn't even know I was in. And now, finally, the war was over. Jessica wiped her eyes, whispering something to herself. Mark looked older than I'd ever seen him. The arrogance had drained away, leaving only the hollow outline of a man who'd built his entire worth on someone else's balance sheet. I stood. You can finish the wine, I said. It's already paid for. No one replied. I walked to the front door, opened it, and let the cold air rush in. It smelled of snow and clean endings. Behind me, the dining room light spilled across the floor, catching the dust motes in its path like tiny stars. Good night, I said, not looking back. And Merry Christmas. The door closed with a click. In the hallway, the clock kept ticking, steady, calm, indifferent. Upstairs, the house felt lighter, as if it had been holding its breath for years and was finally free to exhale. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the snow settle over the yard, covering the footprints that had led away from my door. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. It belonged to me again. The house entered a strange kind of silence after the Christmas night explosion, an unnatural, deliberate, quiet, like the calm that follows a crime no one wants to name. Mark and Jessica barely left their room for the first 2 days. I could hear the muffled cadence of their arguments through the walls, the thud of a suitcase, the sharp syllables of blame, the hollow pauses where neither of them wanted to be the first to surrender. I didn't go near them. The house was large enough that avoidance came easy. I spent my mornings in the study, my afternoons in the garden, pruning the orchids Eleanor had loved. She used to call them the house's pulse. Now their leaves were limp, their roots slick with salt. Someone had poured water into the pot from the same shaker I used for the driveway. I didn't need to ask who. The next day, I found coffee splashed across one of my old first editions, The Histories of Tacitus. Leather-bound, brittle from age. The stain had spread across the cover like a bruise. I didn't curse, didn't even sigh. I just fetched a damp cloth and wiped it gently. Circular, steady. Each motion felt like erasing their presence, molecule by molecule. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was a kind of weary disgust, the disappointment of seeing exactly how small people become when they run out of power. By the third day, the silence broke into digital noise, calls, texts. First angry, then pleading, then angry again. You'll regret this, Dad. How can you do this to your own son? You don't understand what Jessica and I are going through. Please, just talk to us. We can fix this. I didn't answer any of them. The phone lit up, vibrated, and went dark again. Like the house itself, I decided to stop responding. 2 days before the deadline, a knock came at my office door. It was soft, hesitant. Come in, I said. Jessica stood there, wrapped in a sweater, too big for her, eyes red and swollen. She looked small, like a child rehearsing a role she no longer believed in. Dad, David. Her voice trembled. I know we were wrong. Mark, he didn't mean those things. He's been under so much pressure. From work, from my parents. He's not himself. I think I waited. She bit her lip, then said it, barely above a whisper. I'm pregnant. The words fell into the room and lay there, lifeless. I looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes darted, unfocused, the way a person looks when they're trying to remember their own lie. And I remembered what Eleanor once told me. A woman knows when another woman carries a life, and when she carries a lie. I looked into her eyes, I would later think, and saw nothing but panic. I've like free. If that's true, I said quietly, then I hope the child will be raised in a place without lies. I turned back to my desk. You still have 2 days. She didn't cry this time. She just stood there, lips trembling, then left without another word. The door closed softly behind her, and the house resumed its silence. That night, I heard drawers opening and closing upstairs, the sound of things being packed without care. A few glass frames shattered. Somewhere, someone dropped a box and cursed. The noise wasn't violent, it was deflated, the sound of defeat. On the final morning, a moving truck arrived. Small, dented, the kind hired by people who no longer cared about appearances. 2 young men in gray uniforms began carrying out boxes. I watched from my office window, the same window where I'd once watched Eleanor trim her roses. Jessica emerged first, her hair tied back, face pale. Mark followed, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. They didn't look at me, though the window was open, and the sound of their packing echoed up the walls. When the truck finally pulled away, the driveway was littered with salt footprints and tire marks. I went outside, stood in the doorway, and breathed in the cold. The air smelled sharp, clean, unsullied. The orchids were still dying, their petals curling inward, but the house felt lighter. I had hoped, just a little, I thought, that there might be something worth saving. That light extinguished it. Sometimes the clarity of closure is a gift. I turned back inside, closing the door gently behind me. The silence that filled the space wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, earned. The war was over, and the quiet was mine to keep. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you? And where are you listening? The morning after they left, the house was so quiet it felt like a different species of silence, alive, alert, listening back. For the first time in months, no footsteps overhead, no half-whispered arguments behind doors. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint chirp of the furnace starting up, dependable as breath. Sunlight slipped through the windows, touching the floorboards Eleanor had once chosen herself. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, watching the steam rise in soft spirals. The air still carried traces of the perfume, cheap cologne, the ghost of burnt toast, but beneath it was something cleaner, the faint scent of possibility. I started with the living room, reoccupation. I called it in my head. It sounded clinical, almost historical, how nations reclaim their territory. I gathered the crystal glasses they left behind, polished the dining table until it shone like the surface of still water. I took down the framed photo Jessica had hung an image of the 2 of them in Santorini, all teeth and filters, and replaced it with a photograph of Eleanor and me on Cape Cod, wind in our hair, the sea behind us a blurred silver. The act of cleaning became ritual. I vacuumed under the sofa cushions, wiped the fingerprints off the light switches, emptied drawers of things that didn't belong to me. In the corner of the living room, I found Eleanor's old record player, dusty, neglected. I brushed it off, replaced the needle, and let a Chopin nocturne fill the house. The piano notes unfurled like sunlight warming frozen soil. By afternoon, I had reached the study. The salt-stained orchids were beyond saving, their petals folded inward like hands in prayer. I carried them to the compost bin, then returned with a new plant I'd bought that morning, a fern, humble, green, alive. A clean slate, I told it, and set it on the sill. That evening, while sorting through a drawer, I found a box of old photos. The cardboard had softened with time. Inside, snapshots of Eleanor laughing on the porch, holding the book on the beach, asleep in a long chair with her hat tilted over her eyes. I sat on the rug and spread them around me. Once, these photos had made me ache. Now, they made me smile. It wasn't grief anymore. It was gratitude. Later that night, I made tea and stared at my phone for a long moment. My thumb hovered over Mark's name. A father's instinct is hard to unlearn. The silence between us felt like a canyon one I almost wanted to bridge, if only for habit's sake. But then I looked around. The tidy room, The soft light, the music still faint in the background. The peace was too precious to lose. I put the phone face down and left it there. The next morning, I called a few old university friends, people I hadn't seen since Eleanor's funeral. Poker night, I said, half expecting polite refusals. But they all said yes. About time you resurfaced. One of them laughed. That Friday, the house came alive again. The front door opened to familiar voices, coats draped over chairs, the smell of good whiskey and takeout pizza. Laughter genuine, unforced, bounced off the walls. The fireplace crackled. We talked about everything. Aging parents, retirement plans, students who thought Wikipedia was a primary source. At one point, as the cards shuffled and the night stretched warm and easy, I realized I was smiling without effort. The kind of smile that doesn't have an audience. Eleanor would have loved it. She used to say poker was therapy disguised as vice. Watching the faces of my friends, I finally understood what she meant. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Safe, honest, shared. When everyone left and the house quieted again, I walked through each room, turning off the lights one by one. The polished floors glowed in the lamplight. The fern by the window looked sturdy, content. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself not Mark's dad, not the man who paid the bills, not the silent witness to other people's greed, just David Sterling, history professor, book lover, gardener, host, whole. I poured one last drink, raised it toward the empty chair where Eleanor's photo sat, and said softly, "We're finally home." Outside, the night air smelled of rain. Inside, the house breathed again, clean, warm, and entirely mine. By spring, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. The air had softened, sunlight pooled across the polished wood floors, and the smell of cut grass drifted in through the open window. Every morning, I brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise in slow, graceful ribbons. Peace had a weight to it, steady, grounding, almost sacred. One Saturday, while trimming the hedge, a woman appeared at the gate with a smile and a straw hat. "You must be David," she said. "I'm Nora, just moved into the gray house down the block." We chatted easily about gardens, neighbors, the endless rain of early spring. And then, casually, she said, "Someone told me this used to be quite the dramatic household. A Christmas party gone wrong?" I gave a small laugh. "That's one way to put it." She hesitated, then added softly, "I heard your son and his wife left in a hurry. People say they lost everything." "Did they?" I asked, clipping a stubborn branch. "That's what they say. The wife, Jessica, right? Apparently ran off to California with some venture capitalist. And your son? Well, the gossip mill says he's broke." She paused. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think most people here quietly admire you. You did what many wouldn't." I smiled faintly. Doing what's right is easier when you've already lost everything that made it hard to stay quiet. She nodded and left me to my hedge. For the first time in years, I felt no sting at the mention of Mark's name, only distance, as if she were talking about someone I'd read about once and have forgotten. A week later, I found a letter in the mailbox. My name, written in my son's hurried, slanted handwriting. No return address. I brought it inside and sat at the kitchen table before opening it. "Dad," it began. "I don't know where to start. Everything's gone wrong. Jessica left me. The business failed. My so-called friends vanished. I know I made mistakes, but you have to understand she pushed me. You know how manipulative she was. I never meant to hurt you." The next pages were a blur of self-pity and excuses. He wrote of sleepless nights, of betrayal, of unfair treatment. Then came the familiar refrain. "If you could help me just one more time, a small loan to get back on my feet, I promise I'll make it right. I just need a chance to start over." I read the letter twice, slowly, once as a father, once as a historian. The father saw the familiar handwriting and remembered a boy who once cried over a broken toy. The historian saw the pattern of cause and effect, how every sentence avoided accountability, how even the apology served as a plea. I folded the letter neatly and looked out the window. The garden shimmered in the afternoon light, calm and indifferent to human messes. That evening, I built a small fire in the fireplace. The paper burned quickly, curling in on itself like a dying leaf. For a moment, the flames flared gold, then faded into gray ash. I didn't feel triumph, only quiet closure. I'd spent months wondering what legacy I would leave behind an empty house. A cautionary tale? But reading that letter, I knew the answer. Mark's words had revealed a void, not in wealth, but in moral compass. Maybe I could fill that void for others, even if I couldn't for him. A week later, I walked through the old university campus. The red brick buildings glowed under the sun, the smell of coffee and paper lingering in the halls. I met with the dean, an old colleague and friend. I want to fund something, I told him. A center for historical and ethical studies. A place to remind people that truth and integrity aren't relics. He listened quietly, then said, "That's an extraordinary idea, David." I smiled. Not extraordinary, just overdue. Now, when I left the office, students crossed the courtyard, laughing, arguing. Their futures still unwritten. The air felt sharp and alive. That night, I sat by the window, watching the garden glow under the porch light. The lemon tree had begun to flower again, small white blossoms opening like cautious hopes. My legacy, I thought, would not be the story of an ungrateful son. It would be something larger, something that outlived both of us. The ashes of the letter still rested in the fireplace, gray and silent. I didn't sweep them away. They were proof that some endings, finally, can stay ended. The years unfolded quietly, as if the house itself had exhaled. By the 5th anniversary of that Christmas, my life had settled into something even I hadn't expected. Steady, gentle, almost tender. The mornings belonged to the garden. The lemon tree, now taller than me. The roses that bloomed without needing coaxing. The afternoons were for books, for music, for small lunches with people who cared more about conversation than gossip. Peace, I learned, is not the absence of sound. It's the right kind of silence, the one that holds instead of hides. When the university invited me to the dedication of the Sterling Center for Historical and Ethical Studies, I hesitated. I'd agreed to the endowment years before, but hadn't expected to feel anything about it. Yet, standing there on the day of the ceremony, among students and colleagues, I felt something close to warmth. The dean gave a short speech, elegant, a little too flattering. This center stands as a testament to Professor David Sterling's belief that truth, once faced, can heal what deceit has broken. There was applause. Someone handed me a small plaque engraved with my name. I smiled for the photos, shook hands, and afterward found myself wandering the corridors. The smell of chalk, dust, and paper felt like home. A few students stopped to thank me. One said, "You taught us that integrity isn't a theory, it's a practice." That was enough. I went home lighter than I'd arrived. It was early evening when I reached my mailbox. Among the usual stack of bills and flyers was one plain envelope, no return address. My name written carefully in pen that bled slightly into the paper. David Sterling. Inside was a single photograph. A man stood in front of a small clapboard house, holding a little girl. The man was thinner, older, his face drawn but calm. The child, barely 2, maybe 3, was resting her head against his shoulder. Her curls caught the light, and even in the faded photo, her eyes looked curious and brave. It took me a moment to breathe. Mark. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in deliberate, almost hesitant handwriting, were 4 words. Her name is Eleanor. The kettle was hissing on the stove, but I didn't move to turn it off. I sat at the kitchen table, the photo in my hand, staring at the man my son had become. He looked neither triumphant nor broken, just real. Human. Maybe older than his years, maybe finally humbled by them. I thought of all the ways he might have meant this. Maybe it was an apology, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was simply his way of saying that life had continued, that something new had grown where everything once burned down. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel forgiveness either, just a soft acceptance, like closing a book you've already finished. Eleanor's name, written in his hand, lingered in my mind. Naming her after her grandmother wasn't manipulation. It wasn't a trick. It was something quieter, a small act of remembrance. maybe even gratitude. I ran my thumb over the ink one last time, then stood, crossed the living room, and opened the drawer of my desk. Inside lay the small things that had survived the years. Eleanor's fountain pen, a faded concert ticket, a pressed leaf from our honeymoon, a note from a student who once wrote, "You made me believe in decency again." I placed the photograph on top, closed the drawer, and listened to the small, satisfying click of wood meeting wood. Not finality, just completion. Outside, the garden shimmered in the soft evening light. The lemon tree was heavy with fruit, its leaves whispering against the wind. I took the watering can and walked out barefoot, the cool earth firm beneath my feet. I thought a part of me will always be Mark's father. But that's only a part. The rest of me, Eleanor's husband, a teacher, a man who once believed in second chances, was still here, still whole. The photo in the drawer wasn't forgiveness or punishment. It was simply what it was, proof that life had gone on for both of us. And as the first stars appeared above the roofline, I felt it clearly peace, not as an achievement, but as a quiet reward for having lived through the storm and chosen, finally, to let the past rest. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking. Like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? Snow fell softly that Christmas Eve, the kind that muted the world into stillness. Through the window, flakes spiraled in the lamplight, settling on the garden where the stubborn lemon tree stood green even against the cold. Inside, the fire burned low. David sat in his worn leather chair by the window, a glass of red wine warming his palm, an open book resting unread on his lap. The clock ticked quietly, marking time that no longer hurried him. The house, once filled with voices and demands, now breathed evenly again. He didn't host Christmas anymore. There were no elaborate dinners, no chatter spilling from the dining room, no forced laughter that left an ache behind. This year, like the few before it, was simple, just him, the fire, a record playing softly in the background. He didn't need more than that. From the kitchen drifted the faint scent of cinnamon and pine. He lit a candle, Eleanor's favorite scent. It mixed with the woody air, turning the house into something warm and living. For the first time in years, it felt like hers again, like theirs. He glanced toward the desk in the corner. The drawer was closed, but he knew what waited inside. A single photograph, yellowed at the edges. Mark, older, standing before a small house, holding a child in his arms. The handwriting on the back still echoed in his memory. Her name is Eleanor. He hadn't looked at it in years. He didn't need to. The memory of it had softened, like a bruise fading beneath the skin. He no longer wondered about his son's life, nor felt the old pang of betrayal. That chapter was written, bound, and shelved where it belonged. The record ended with a small hiss. He stood, crossed the room, and flipped it. Schubert's Serenade began again, Eleanor's favorite. The music moved slowly, tenderly, like a heartbeat. He poured the last of the wine into his glass and sat back down, the warmth of the fire brushing his legs. They used to shout in this room, he thought. They used to fill it with words that meant nothing. Now, he smiled faintly. Now, it's finally quiet. But it wasn't an empty quiet. It was a full, gentle one, the kind that hummed with memory and forgiveness. The walls no longer held echoes of anger. They held stories. He closed his eyes. The fire cracked once, steady and content. Outside, snow kept falling, soft as breath. The world seemed to exhale with him. He thought of Eleanor not as a ghost, but as a presence. Of his students still writing him letters. Of the lemon tree that refused to die year after year. He lifted his glass slightly toward the empty room. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly. It wasn't a toast to anyone. It was to peace itself. The house answered with silence, warm, unbroken, alive. David leaned back, eyes half closed. The music and fire wrapping around him like an old promise kept. And for the first time in a long life, he understood. This was not the silence of loneliness. It was the sound of a man finally home.